Eric stepped out of the prison gates, blinking as the sunlight hit his eyes for the first time in years. The world outside seemed brighter, louder, almost too much for him after the cold, gray years he'd spent behind bars. He took a deep breath, trying to savor the feeling of freedom. But as he looked around, he was quickly reminded that he didn't truly feel free. Eric had once been a thief. Out of desperation, he had stolen food, clothes, and eventually money. His crimes were small, but he was caught and sentenced to years in prison. During those years, he had a lot of time to think, to regret his actions, and to imagine a different future for himself. He dreamed of a life where he could work an honest job, live in peace, and perhaps one day be forgiven. But now that he was out, he began to realize that the town hadn't forgotten, or forgiven, his past. As he walked down the cobblestone streets of his old town, he felt the stares of people passing by. Mothers whispered to their children, "Stay away from him," and shopkeepers turned their backs when he came near. Eric saw one familiar face after another, but no one greeted him. It was as if he were invisible, or worse, a ghost of his former self, a reminder of something shameful they wanted to forget. Desperate to find a new beginning, Eric spent days going from shop to shop, farm to farm, asking for work. But each time the answer was the same: a shake of the head, a muttered excuse, or a door shut in his face. No one wanted to hire an ex-convict, a thief who had once stolen from their own. It didn't matter that he had paid for his crimes or that he wanted to change. To them, Eric was still the same man who had stolen from their tables. As the days turned into weeks, Eric grew more hopeless. He had spent so many nights dreaming of this moment, of walking free and starting over, but freedom had turned into a prison of its own. Now he was trapped by his reputation, bound by the town's unwillingness to see him as anything but a criminal. At night, Eric slept on the cold stone benches in the town square, covering himself with an old, torn coat he had found abandoned in an alley. He watched as people passed by without a glance, busy with their lives, safe in their warm homes. He listened to the distant sounds of laughter and music from the inns, sounds that felt like echoes from a world he no longer belonged to. His stomach ached with hunger, his feet were sore from walking, and his spirit was growing weaker by the day. Sometimes, as he lay beneath the stars, he questioned whether he would ever truly escape his past. He wondered if he would ever be more than a man with a record, a man everyone avoided. He began to feel as if the world had already decided his fate, that he was destined to be alone, to wander without purpose or hope. One cold night, as Eric wandered aimlessly through the narrow streets, his stomach grumbled painfully. The chill seeped through his thin, ragged coat, and he shivered as he wrapped it tighter around himself. The town was quiet, with most people safely tucked inside their warm homes. But for Eric, there was no door to knock on, no bed waiting for him. Just as he was about to find a bench to spend the night, he spotted a small church at the end of the street. Light spilled through the stained glass windows, casting soft colors onto the ground outside. The sight was strangely comforting, and drawn by the warmth, he hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Inside, the church was quiet, with rows of simple wooden pews and the faint smell of old candles. At the far end, near the altar, an elderly priest was arranging books on a shelf. Hearing Eric's hesitant footsteps, the priest looked up and smiled warmly. "Good evening," the priest greeted him, his voice kind and welcoming. "Come in, please." Eric froze, unsure of what to say. No one had spoken to him so kindly in a long time. He shuffled his feet and looked down, feeling ashamed of his dirty clothes and rough appearance. The priest walked over to him, taking in Eric's worn-out coat, hollow cheeks, and weary eyes. "You look like you could use a meal," he said gently. Without waiting for a reply, the priest gestured for him to sit down. "I'm Father Matthew. Please sit. I'll bring you something warm to eat." Too tired and hungry to resist, Eric sat down at one of the pews. Soon Father Matthew returned with a bowl of steaming soup, a piece of bread, and a small cup of tea. The simple meal smelled heavenly, and Eric hesitated only a moment before taking a grateful sip of the soup. As he ate, Father Matthew sat beside him, silently watching him with a peaceful smile. After Eric had finished his meal, he looked at the priest, his heart heavy with confusion. "Why are you helping me?" he finally asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Don't you know who I am?" Father Matthew nodded slowly. "Yes, I know," he replied. "But I also know that every person deserves kindness, no matter their past. You've been through hard times, but that doesn't mean you're beyond redemption." Eric frowned, struggling to believe the priest's words. "No one else thinks that. No one will even give me a chance," he said, bitterness creeping into his voice. "They see me as nothing more than a thief." The priest looked at him with deep, understanding eyes. "The world can be harsh, but you must not let others' opinions define you. You have the power to choose a different path. Perhaps it won't be easy, and perhaps not everyone will accept it. But if you want to change, that change starts from within." Eric listened quietly, his heart conflicted. Part of him wanted to believe Father Matthew, to believe that he could rebuild his life, that he could be someone different. But another part of him, worn down by years of rejection and hardship, wasn't so sure. "Thank you, Father," he said finally, his voice soft. "I don't know if I deserve this kindness, but thank you." Father Matthew placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're welcome to stay here tonight, Eric. I'll prepare a small room for you. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but remember, you're not alone." For the first time in a long while, Eric felt a glimmer of warmth, not just from the food or the shelter, but from the priest's kindness. It was a warmth that started to thaw the layers of bitterness and despair he had built up over the years. That night, as he lay on the small cot in the church's guest room, Eric closed his eyes and allowed himself to imagine, just for a moment, a future that was different from his past. He wasn't sure if he could change, but perhaps, with a little hope, he could try. The next morning, Eric left the church with a small loaf of bread that Father Matthew had given him. He clutched it in his hands, feeling its warmth, and murmured a quiet thank you to the priest, who had sent him off with words of encouragement and a gentle smile. Eric's heart felt a little lighter, though he knew the road ahead would still be difficult. As he walked through the town, he tried to imagine what his new beginning might look like. He thought of finding a small job, maybe working at the docks or in one of the bakeries, slowly saving enough to leave this town behind and start fresh somewhere else. The hope was faint, but it was there. Like a spark he was afraid to let grow too bright in case it got snuffed out too quickly. Lost in his thoughts, Eric didn't notice the small leather bag lying just off the cobblestone path. He nearly tripped over it, and as he caught his balance, he glanced down. The bag was finely made, the leather smooth and clearly expensive. Curiously, Eric bent down and picked it up, surprised by how heavy it felt. He hesitated, glancing around. No one was nearby. The street was quiet, with only the soft chirping of birds breaking the silence. Slowly, Eric opened the bag, and his eyes widened as he saw the glint of gold coins inside. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life, enough to buy food, clothing, perhaps even a ticket out of town. His heart began to pound. With this money he could escape his past. He could leave behind the stares, the whispers, and the judgment. He could start a new life somewhere far away, where no one knew him as a thief, where he could finally be free. For a moment, Eric's mind raced with possibilities. The gold in his hand felt almost magical, promising a life he had only dreamed of. All he had to do was slip the bag into his coat, walk away, and disappear. No one would know, no one would care. It would be easy. But as he looked at the coins, a memory flashed through his mind. Father Matthew's kind face, his words about choosing a different path, about finding redemption. Eric's hands trembled as he remembered the warmth of the church, the taste of the simple meal, and the kindness that had been shown to him without question. Slowly, he closed the bag. The temptation lingered, tugging at his mind, but something inside him had shifted. He wanted to be someone different. He wanted to honor the trust Father Matthew had placed in him, to prove that he could truly change. With a deep, steadying breath, Eric knelt down and left the bag exactly where he had found it. He took one last look at it before turning and walking away, each step feeling heavier but strangely freeing. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Eric felt a quiet pride in his choice. As he walked, he whispered to himself, "I am not who I was." Several days passed after Eric's encounter with the bag of gold. The decision to leave it behind had been hard, but it had also filled him with a strange sense of relief. He had chosen the right path, but he still felt lost, wandering through town without any real direction. Jobs were scarce, especially for someone like him, but he held on to the faint hope that somehow he would find his place. One afternoon, as he walked through the bustling market square, the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, making his stomach growl. Following the scent, he came upon a small bakery with a sign that read, "Lucy's Bread and Pastries." Through the window, he could see a young woman behind the counter, her sleeves rolled up, flour dusting her hands as she worked. She looked flustered, glancing back and forth between her customers and the trays of bread baking in the oven. Curious, Eric stepped inside. The woman noticed him and offered a quick smile, though she looked tired. "Welcome. Please have a seat, I'll be right with you," she said, rushing to hand a customer their change. As the shop quieted down, the woman turned to Eric with a sigh of relief. "I'm Lucy," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's been a busy day and I'm short on help. My assistant fell ill this morning and it's been chaos ever since." Without thinking, Eric offered, "I can help. I don't have much experience, but I can learn." Lucy raised an eyebrow, studying him for a moment. "Aren't you?" Her voice trailed off, and Eric knew she recognized him. His heart sank, expecting her to turn him away. But instead she took a deep breath and nodded, as if making a decision. "All right," she said firmly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, right? You can start by helping me with the bread trays. Be careful, they're hot." Surprised and grateful, Eric followed her instructions. He carefully lifted the trays, the warm aroma of bread filling the shop as he placed them on the cooling racks. Lucy showed him how to knead dough, shape the loaves, and serve customers. He worked slowly at first, nervous that he might make a mistake, but Lucy was patient, correcting him with gentle guidance and a kind smile. As the day went on, Eric began to feel a small spark of pride. Customers came and went, and though a few cast wary glances his way, many simply took their bread, smiled, and went on with their day. The work was tiring, but it felt good, honest, rewarding. After the last customer left, Lucy handed him a warm loaf. "For you," she said, smiling. "You've earned it." Eric held the bread, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Lucy nodded, leaning against the counter. "I believe in looking forward, not back. If you're willing to work hard, you're welcome here." Days turned into weeks, and Eric found himself returning to the bakery each morning, eager to work. He became more confident in his tasks, learning the rhythm of the bakery and gaining a sense of purpose. Slowly, word spread in the town that Eric was working at Lucy's bakery. People were cautious at first, but as they saw him working day after day, treating each customer with respect, their opinions began to soften. One by one, people started to greet him with friendly nods, some even stopping to chat for a moment as they bought their bread. Lucy often encouraged him, reminding him that trust takes time but is worth earning. Her belief in him gave him strength, helping him believe in himself, even when he still felt the weight of his past. Eric's life began to blossom in ways he had never expected. He no longer felt like an outcast, but a part of the community, someone valued and respected. For the first time in a long time, he felt a warmth growing inside him, a hope that his future could indeed be different from his past. Eric's new life at the bakery had become a source of pride and purpose. He woke up each morning ready to work alongside Lucy, kneading dough, baking bread, and greeting customers who now treated him like any other neighbor. The cautious smiles had turned into friendly waves, and a few people even began to ask how he was settling into his new life. Eric felt a glimmer of happiness he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he was part of something real, something good. But one day, as he was closing up the bakery, a figure from his past emerged from the shadows. Eric's heart dropped when he recognized Sam, an old acquaintance from his former life. Sam was rough around the edges, a man who knew Eric from the days when survival meant making choices that would haunt them both. "Long time, Eric," Sam said, a sly grin on his face. "Heard you've been playing the good citizen here. Must be nice to fool these folks, huh?" Eric stiffened, unsure how to respond. He felt the old fears creeping in, the memories of the life he'd tried so hard to leave behind. "I'm just working, Sam. I don't want any trouble." But Sam only chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, that's the thing, Eric. I could tell all these nice people about who you really are, about what you did, and I'm sure they'd be real interested to know the truth." A cold sweat ran down Eric's back. He could see it clearly, Sam telling the whole town about his past, shattering the fragile trust he'd worked so hard to build. But as Sam's words hung in the air, Eric realized he had a choice. He could try to pay Sam off, to keep him quiet and hide his past, or he could finally face it. He knew now that hiding forever wasn't true freedom. With a deep breath, Eric met Sam's gaze, his voice steady. "Go ahead," he said. "Tell them. I'm not hiding anymore." The next morning, Eric stood in front of the bakery, waiting for the townspeople to arrive. He felt his heart pounding, but he steadied himself, knowing this was something he had to do. As Lucy and a few of the regulars gathered around, Eric took a deep breath and told them everything. He admitted to his past mistakes, the choices that had led him to prison, and the regret that had weighed on him ever since. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I've tried to change. I've worked hard to become someone better, and I hope you can see that, even if you can't forgive me." There was a silence, and Eric prepared himself for anger, for rejection. But to his surprise, Lucy stepped forward, her expression kind. "Eric, we've all seen how hard you've worked. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is the person you are now, not who you were." One by one, the townspeople nodded in agreement. An older woman patted his shoulder. A young boy gave him a shy smile, and even those who had once looked at him with suspicion offered words of encouragement. Eric felt a wave of relief and gratitude he could hardly express. In that moment, Eric knew he had found his true freedom, not by erasing his past, but by facing it with honesty and courage. With the town's forgiveness and Lucy's support, he had finally found peace within himself. From that day on, Eric continued to work at the bakery, but he did so with a new sense of purpose, knowing that he was no longer alone. His journey had been long and difficult, but he had found redemption, not just in the eyes of others, but in his own heart.